welcome to Bethany Covenant Church. I am Pastor Chris. I'm glad that you're joining us today on the live stream. I would invite you, if you feel ready, to join us in person on a Sunday. You know, we value this live stream and our digital ministry that we learned how to do well during the past 2 years. But we feel called very much to be a face-to-face ministry. And so I'm so glad you're watching at home, but when it is time and you feel comfortable, I would invite you here to Bethany for one of our services at 9 o'clock or a service at 10:30. We are in the midst of a series called Wisdom and Power, looking through the book of Ecclesiastes. In just a minute, our worship team will play, and following that, we're going to get into Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 13 through chapter 10, verse 20. So you can have your Bibles ready and open to go. This also will be our offering time. Right now, normally in church, we pass the plates around. I'm inviting you to go to bethanycovenant.com/giving. On that page, you can set up weekly recurring giving, monthly recurring giving. Make all your gifts to the work of Bethany Covenant Church on our site. You can also send in your gifts to the ministry here at Bethany. Our mission here is to help people follow Jesus. And whether that's somebody outside of church that hasn't stepped in church for a long time, we want them to take just one more step towards a life with Jesus. And for somebody who's maybe been at Bethany for 40, 50, 60 years, there's still more growth that can happen. That Jesus Christ and that relationship with Jesus is one that keeps going through our whole life and on through eternity. And that's the work that we are doing here. I invite you to remind you that coming up in April 10th is Palm Sunday. Easter is April 17th. Check our website for all the plans for each of those services and have in mind already, okay, we're going to be there for Palm Sunday. We're going to be there for Easter Sunday. We're inviting these folks on Easter Sunday. They are both significant Sundays in our year, and I'm excited to see you and hope that you can join us for both of those services during Holy Week. Well, right now, we're going to stay in the sanctuary. I would invite you to kind of clear your mind as the worship team leads us through this song and then prepares us for the teaching that follows.
Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb. sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him. So open up the gates, make way before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. And every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Good morning and welcome to Bethany Covenant Church. Welcome to our live stream. Welcome to our podcast. Just for future reference, if you miss any of our messages, you can go back on our website or Spotify or iTunes, find all our former series and former messages in this series, Ecclesiastes, as well. We are reaching the end of our series and our study in the book of Ecclesiastes. And today, I think is one of the more relevant passages for this specific moment in history for us. It touches on two topics that I think as a church we need to think more deeply about, and as a culture we need to think more deeply about. And the first is wisdom and the nature of wisdom and what true wisdom looks like in our day. You know, last week we talked about the limitations of wisdom, but today we'll talk about the benefits of wisdom. What are the benefits of living as a wise person over a foolish person? And what are the consequences of living as a foolish person or even being around a foolish person. And then the second topic to think deeply about in our day is the topic of leadership and what is good leadership. I worry that good leadership or leadership has descended to a place where we just define a leader as someone who has a lot of followers, whether followers in one landscape or followers online. But good leadership and the qualities of a healthy leader and healthy leadership are more than just having a bunch of followers. And the scriptures display for us and show us the qualities of what a good leader of high character looks like. And we're going to look at that today as well. Well, last week we talked about the limitations of righteousness and the limitations of wisdom. And even though wisdom may be able to accomplish many things or may not be able to accomplish everything, it is still the best way to do many things. And we're going to see in the text today that wisdom is best for dealing with complexity. Wisdom is best for dealing with bad rulers and bad kings. Wisdom is best for dealing with foolish people, that wisdom is still the best way to live in an uncertain world. And I want to start today with the last part of our passage. This is Ecclesiastes 10, verse 20. And the teacher kind of comes to the end of this, and he's talking about bad kings and bad rulers, and as people, when we have to live under a bad king or a bad ruler. And the teacher says this in verse 20. He says, "Do not revile the king, even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say." Now, I don't think the birds are going to report those things, but the teacher here is describing a kind of nation that is oppressive, that he's advising discretion when speaking against the king or speaking against those in charge, because what if somebody caught wind of it and it got back to them, and then the king heard of that and ended up putting you in jail or even killing you? That he's not speaking about somewhere here where we have a freedom to speak and we're able to speak out against the government without fear of being put in jail or killed. We're able to be critical of policies and even critical of behavior of our leaders. He's picturing here a scenario where speaking out could have severe consequences for someone. Now, the writer of Ecclesiastes, as we've seen, has exceptions to everything. And I think even the writer of Ecclesiastes would say that at times we do need to speak out and we do need to say something because the consequences are that high. Even if we speak out, the consequences may be high for us. And there are moments to accept those consequences. And it is good that there are those around the world right now speaking out against oppressive places, speaking out against bad leaders, speaking out about those who are in charge and doing a terrible job or doing evil things in being in charge. For us in our country, our reflection on this passage is that as followers of Jesus living in a free country, what should be our speech and our public discourse be like? What's wonderful about the Bible is that there are letters written to followers of Jesus all throughout the ancient world. And at a lot of these cities, there were very few followers of Jesus. Like even in New Hampshire, we're kind of lowest in the country. And yet you write to somebody like Ephesus, and Ephesus had like a really small group in a pretty good-sized city. And so Paul writes to this group of Jesus followers in Ephesus, and he says this of how to live in a place where there weren't a lot of Jesus followers. He says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." That the instruction of Paul in this text to followers of Jesus is watch carefully how you walk. Give careful attention to how you live. Remember that the goal of your life is to be like Jesus Christ. And so keep pressing towards that goal, because Paul sees the potential for missteps to be so high and the potential to be unwise so high than to be wise. And the feeling of this text when it comes to wisdom is that the task of wisdom is not moving at a frenetic pace. The task of wisdom is being patient and diligent and intentional with what we're doing. That's the best way to do life, the best way towards decision making. That the way of wisdom is often not the easy way, because wisdom requires patience, and we're not always the most patient people. The way of wisdom requires listening, and we would rather speak than listen. And the scriptures will often tell us to be wise in the culture that we live in. Jesus did it in his day. When he's sending out the disciples, he gives them this instruction. He says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Now, he changes some of the metaphors that he's used before. You know, when Jesus has often talked about sheep before, he's talked about them as lost sheep. And here he kind of changes the metaphor a little bit. That he calls the disciples sheep going out among wolves. Now, wolves, we understand that metaphor well. Wolves are dangerous. Wolves travel in packs. Wolves often don't come up to people and act pleasantly. Wolves have an aggression to them. For a wolf, it is all about the wolf. If you are hungry, a wolf will not hesitate to do what the wolf needs to do in that moment. And so Jesus' use of the word sheep here is to display the sense of vulnerability when followers of Jesus go out into the world to share the message of Jesus. That when Jesus talks about sheep, he's speaking much more about vulnerability in this context. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves, and you will be vulnerable. You see, some people they'll come across and they'll share the message of Jesus Christ, and it'll be the ultimate freedom for that person. They will find freedom from a God who gives them grace and forgiveness. They'll find freedom in a life to live a life of generosity and goodness. They'll find freedom in a purity and obedience to God. For others, the message of Jesus comes as the ultimate threat. That, I'd rather hang on to these hates and resentments I have towards others than accept your way of doing life, Jesus, of loving your neighbor. Or I'd rather hold on to my own stuff and my own sense of personal autonomy in life than turn that over to you, Jesus. Or I'd rather hold on to my own power and my own lifestyle than turn that over to you, Jesus. And so we forget at times that it is vulnerable to share the message of Jesus in the culture that we live in. You know, for a few generations in the United States, Christians have made up the larger part of the population. And so we've been able to exert probably more power and not be as vulnerable. But that's changing. Christians in the time of Ephesus, they didn't have the power. They had to be vulnerable. And so you may look at areas of this world where to follow Jesus is to live with great vulnerability to persecution and to violence and to injustice. And so Jesus then goes on to give this instruction. He says, so you're going to be vulnerable, so be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Now, normally the image of a snake in the scriptures is negative, but here Jesus kind of helping us find like the positive qualities of a snake. You know, a snake is watchful and observant and timely. A snake is the emblem for wisdom, for shrewdness, for intellectual keenness at parts of the scriptures. A snake waits and is patient and knows exactly the right time to act and does so quickly and decisively. Now, if Jesus had stopped there, he'd just be sending out a bunch of snakes, but he doesn't. He uses the image of the doves and he tells them, and be innocent as doves. Well, think of a dove. A dove is peaceful. A dove is incapable of intrigue. A dove is innocent. And so in living like a dove, you don't give people any reason to accuse you of wrongdoing. You keep a clean reputation. And so as followers of Jesus, we need that sense of shrewdness and craftiness and innocence and reputation and cleanness of character. Because think about it, without the innocence, the snake of doves, the snake is a menace. Without the wisdom of the snake, the dove is naive and helpless. And so our living and our speaking, the speaking and the living that we do in the name of Jesus, it's never to win an argument. We're not trying to win an argument that Christianity or that following Jesus is the best way to do things. We're there to show people the love of Jesus Christ and the love of God so that God may win them over and Jesus' kindness may win them over. Our country gives us great freedoms of speech, but Jesus limits those as a Jesus follower. Jesus says, this is the way you are to live. This is the way you are to speak. And so that's kind of how he wraps this verse up. But let's begin with chapter 10 in Ecclesiastes, verse 1. I'm going to go through these kind of verse by verse, and I want you to look for the value of wisdom and second for the qualities of leadership. And then we'll go back to the very beginning in chapter 9, verse 15, and we'll kind of close with the beginning of the text today. So this is Ecclesiastes 10, verse 1. And it says, as dead flies gift perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. I really wanted to make this kind of an experiential part of the service, and so I was going to pass out bottles of Christian Dior perfume with a dead fly in each bottle of it, but that proved to be very, very expensive. Finding 200 plus dead flies in New Hampshire right now, kind of tough. I was going to have to flown in the dead flies. It would have been very expensive. And so we need like a few more weeks for the flies up here. And so the teacher, through this little proverb, is echoing kind of a common proverb that we even have in English, that, one bad apple ruins the bunch or ruins the bushel. I eat blueberries almost every morning, and occasionally I found like one blueberry with kind of the white fuzz on it, and I have to ask the question is like, does that one blueberry ruin the whole package of blueberries, or can I still find the ones in there that are clean? And here's the intention of this text, is that leaders can act wise and with wisdom, but the foolishness of just one person, the foolishness of just one offender can detract from all the wisdom that others have shown. And so he's being realistic here. He's saying wisdom is still the way to go, but also know that you as a leader, you as a wisdom person can do everything right and make every single right decision, and just one offender, one foolish person, one person not using wisdom can still detract from all the good work and all the decisions that have been done. And so the teacher is affirming the value of wisdom, but also recognizes that foolishness can also undermine the position of the wise person. And so the key takeaway from this text, an easy application, don't be a dead fly. None of us want to be the dead fly in the perfume. I don't want to be the fool that weighs down people of wisdom and honor who are around me. And I think the second takeaway is don't give up on wisdom, even when one person ruins a wisdom moment. I've seen that happen in the church over and over again. I've seen leaders make great, great decisions in the life of the church, and then just one person in the church kind of like undermine all the well-meaning and wise decisions of leaders. And that's not what we want to do in the culture. We don't want to do that in the church. We don't want to do that in the families. We want to be a wise person, because being a foolish person can kind of undermine even the best decisions of wise people around us. Chapter 10, verses 2 through 3. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. This has nothing to do with the right and left in our country. I don't want anyone thinking here, see, it's the wise people that go to the right and the fools that go to the left. No, the teacher knows nothing about liberal and conservative politics in America. He is not commenting on that in that text. The text is a way of saying that the mind of a wise person and a foolish person, that they are of opposite minds. They are going opposite directions. They're moving in different places. And the book of Proverbs, it contrasts the wise person, the foolish person, often throughout that book. Just listen to a few of these. A wise person brings joy to his father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. Yeah, I've had my share of foolish moments with my mother before. Proverbs 10:8, the wise at heart accept commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. A wise person is actually able to listen to the good counsel of those around them. Proverbs 10:23, a fool finds pleasure in wicked schemes, but a person of understanding delights in wisdom. Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. How many people just never listen to anybody and just do their own thing all the time? That the writer of Proverbs says that is a foolish person. They should take a lesson from the wise and listen to people around them for advice. Proverbs 12:16, fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. Fools just kind of explode on the scene when anything goes wrong, but a prudent overlooks an insult. I'll come back to that one in a minute. The prudent keep their knowledge to themselves, but a fool's heart blurts out folly. To answer before listening, that is folly, and that is shame. Proverbs 18:13. Proverbs 19:11. A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. I love that line. It's to one's glory, to one's benefit to overlook an offense. Certainly, if it is something big, seek accountability. If there's an offense, certainly go to the right people and seek accountability. I think this is more meant for smaller things. And this is something that our culture doesn't do very well right now. We do not do this well. We actually look intently for things that someone would say that offends us. It is a vulnerable thing to get up and speak on camera every week because I go home after this and I'm kind of like, okay, what did I say today that's going to make me vulnerable? Could have offended somebody. Did I say a word wrong, a phrase wrong? Did I mess up a key theology by using one word instead of another word? And you just kind of wait like, oh, is someone going to jump on you for that? That we are on the lookout for offenses right now in our culture. And the writer of Ecclesiastes says it's possible to have the wisdom to overlook an offense by someone else against you. To recognize that those around us may have a bad day or a bad moment and not jump all over them in an outrage. The scriptures talk about that we outdo one another in love. I think right now in our culture, on the news, on debate shows, in social media, that we're trying to outdo one another in outrage. And the writer of Proverbs says, it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. A wise person has the discernment to know when to do that. Verse 4 of chapter 10 in Ecclesiastes, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. How do you deal with a bad ruler or a bad person who's in authority when they get angry? Here the writer of Ecclesiastes says, make sure you stay focused on your task. Just because the leader is a bad day or a bad life does not mean that you need to lose your sense of purpose in life. And it is time for some honesty here, because working under a bad ruler or a bad boss weighs on us daily. There's nothing worse than going to work knowing that you have a boss that isn't going to treat you well, isn't going to be fair, is going to be passive-aggressive in the way that they handle things around the office, is just creates anxiety with the way that they are, or creates tension, or doesn't use a healthy motivation, but uses kind of anger and manipulation to get the results that they want to get. That serving under a bad boss is taxing to us as people. And here the writer of Ecclesiastes says, when you got a bad boss, a bad ruler, use wisdom with how to deal with that moment. Be calm. Remember your purpose. Here the teacher says, keep finding your sense of purpose and right motivation for what you are doing. Yes, there may be a time to leave a certain job, and if it is, then leave the job. It may be the wise and discerning thing to do. But he says the best way to deal with a bad ruler is with wisdom. The wisdom to know when to move on. The wisdom to know when to report something. The wisdom to not to escalate the situation and make you the one who could take all the blame in that matter. And so wisdom is the best way to approach bad bosses, bad leaders around us. He goes on in verse 5 through 7. He says, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. So he's picturing here a ruler. He says, that ruler puts fools in many high places, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback while princes go on foot like slaves. Now, the teacher kind of makes a cultural assumption here that I don't think we can make anymore, but he makes the assumption that, that people from the upper class in his culture would be the best ones to rule. We don't really make that assumption anymore. We kind of look for qualifications and we look for people with good leadership skills. But his major issue here is that he sees rulers surrounding themselves with people that are not qualified for the jobs that they have been hired to do. That the wisdom is here is great leaders don't surround themselves with yes people. Foolish leaders surround themselves with yes people. One of the earliest lessons I learned from one of my earliest mentors in leadership is he would say to me, he says, Chris, hire good people. Hire good people. And one of my earliest favorite books in leadership is published in 2005, and it's titled, Why Great Leaders Don't Take Yes for an Answer. And it's all about making decisions as a leader by using qualities of candor within the team, conflict within the team, debate within the team, and allowing people to express dissent to the leader as part of the decision process. That a key part to great leadership is surrounding yourselves with people who will challenge you. A key part to being a great leader is surrounding yourself with people who can speak truth to you when you as a leader may be headed down a foolish path or down a dangerous path. Surrounding yourself with yes people or cutting off people around you to give you wise counsel, that's the recipe for a disaster in any leadership situation. It's that way in the church, it's that way for a nation, it's that way for a business, it's that way for an organization. That I've learned many times as a pastor that I don't need to be right on everything. But I must create the environment for those who are going to be right to shine through and to allow them to be right. Sometimes my role as a leader is just to listen to the wide variety of opinions and ideas and bring those together so that as an overall church, we make the best decision. That the decisions that we make as a church, it doesn't need to be best for one person. It needs to be best for Bethany as a whole. And so I think a key trait of a great leader, and one of the things that we try and live out here, is to surround yourself with highly qualified people and allow those people to challenge you. Allow there to be dissent. Allow there to be opposing voices so that you make the best decision for the organization. A foolish leader cuts out dissent and cuts out qualified people in giving them counsel and just goes it alone instead. A foolish leader surrounds himself with yes men who only say what the leader wants to hear. That is a recipe for disaster in leadership. Now, next, the teacher gets into the kind of normal, everyday dangers of work and why wisdom is needed. He says, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stone may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. I think this is the beginning of his commercial for his own insurance company here. You could fall into a pit or get bit by a viper or hurt yourself quarrying stone. And he's like starting under the sun insurance or something. But he says, because life is precarious and dangers around every corner, it's like a State Farm commercial, that here's what you need to do. He says, live in those kind of precarious situations with wisdom and make them better. And so if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed. But skill will bring success. If a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. Here's what he's getting at, and this is all about leadership, is great leaders are always learning and sharpening their skills for leadership. Be very weary of the leader who thinks they already know everything, doesn't need to sharpen their skills, doesn't need to grow, doesn't need to read, doesn't need to research. Great leaders continually sharpen their skills as a leader. I was at a conference 3 years ago, and one of the scariest moments of the conference was when one of the guys got up and said, pastors need to be able to reinvent themselves every 6 years. It may even be shorter now. You know, I've been a pastor for almost 22 years now, or 21 years now, and I have looked back, and I can look back and say, okay, I can see that as a reinvention. I can see that as a reinvention. And the thing is, it's not just for pastors. That there's not a job that many of us are doing right now that it's not the same thing. You know, that every 5 to 6 years, there's that reinvention that needs to happen. Maybe there was a day when someone was hired for a job and that for the most part, that job stayed the same for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, and you just went in and clocked in and you did the same thing every single day. I don't think that that's really the case anymore. The jobs do require that we keep learning new skills, and that kind of self-development requires such energy and brand new habits. It is hard to reinvent yourself in a job on the fly, even if you know the job in a really great way. And so you look back at the past 2 years in our culture, that one of the reasons we're tired and stressed, and so many people are rethinking careers or retiring early, is because we all had to go through a time of forced reinventing of how we work and do our work. You know, I had to reinvent as a pastor in these past 2 years. Teachers, they had to do the same thing, reinvent how they teach, reinvent what it means to be a teacher. Still the core principles, but how we did it was changing. Nurses and doctors, there's this reinvention that was happening. Business leaders, restaurant owners, you had to find a way to do business in ways that you had never done before. It's no wonder people are tired, because anytime you're on this huge learning curve of our whole job, that's going to be tiring. And so here he kind of says, he comes on and says, life is precarious. You're going to run into snakes and walls, and you may fall into pits, and there's going to be pandemics that come, and there are going to be other challenges that come. So what do the great leaders do? The great leaders are lifelong learners. The great leaders sharpen their skills for leadership. The great leaders adapt and change as the challenges come their way. I'm not sure one can be a great leader without being a learning leader and a lifelong learner. And so that's one of the things that I think we could think deeply about as a culture right now, is how does learning come into leadership? The writer of Ecclesiastes thought that that was critical. And so then in the next verses, the teacher gives some practical advice on how to recognize the fools around you. You know, so this is, you can go out and just watch for fools and use this criteria. He kind of looks at, okay, here's what a wise person does and a wise leader does. But let me kind of tell you somebody who's like a foolish person. And he says this in verse 12. He says, words from the mouth of the wise are gracious. You want to see a wise person? Look for a graciousness in the way that they speak. And he goes on to say, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. And fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. How we use our words, the teacher of Ecclesiastes says, is an indication of our wisdom and our folly. And I can look back at a lot of moments in my life, some this morning, that showed a foolishness with the way that I used words. And so part of it is we want to become wiser, we use our words in a more gracious and graceful way. A fool's words are self-destructive, and they just devour him. It says that fools multiply words, that fools just say things over and over again, always talking, and yet through all that talking, it's meant to compensate for having very little understanding. And so great leaders and wise people are careful with their words. It's a growth area for me. It could be a growth area for all of us, is how do we speak less so that we are wise with our words? And then he closes the section talking about the importance of leadership. And he says, woe to the land whose king was a servant, whose princes feast in the morning. Again, he kind of makes that same assumption he made earlier. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth, and whose princes eat at a proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. And so the point is that he's saying is do your best to find competent leaders, someone who can lead wisely. And he goes on to talk about lazy leaders. Through laziness, the rafters sag. Because of idle hands, the house leaks. A feast is made for laughter. Wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. And kind of what he's saying here is a good leader would have worked on the house instead of throwing a party. Now, and this is coming from the writer of Ecclesiastes that loves parties and wants us to enjoy life. But I think what he's getting at here in this last part is that the character of a leader is important. He looks at the leader and he puts some definition to this. He likes leaders that eat at the right time and that eat for strength and not for drunkenness. And so a leader must have the maturity, must have the good management of his or her own habits. A great leader is a person of personal maturity. They have the quality of self-awareness, have been through enough trials to kind of lead well through difficult times. Great leaders know how to manage conflict and those around them. Great leaders are trustworthy and they trust others. In the book Practicing Greatness, McNeil describes leadership this way. He says, great leaders bless people. They inspire and encourage. They help people become more than what they have been. Maybe even more than they thought they could be. Great leaders help people be part of something bigger than themselves. In short, great leaders leave people better off than they were before the leader enters their life. You know, there will be many in our culture who have many, many followers. Many people who will view them on Facebook or social media. Many people who will get lots and lots of likes. And because of having a lot of followers, getting a lot of likes, having a lot of viewers, they'll just assume that they're leaders or great leaders because they have so many people following them. But our best model for leadership is not having someone with a bunch of followers. Our best model for leadership is Jesus. He was the best leader, the most mature, the most self-aware, the most humble, the most sacrificial, the wisest leader in all of history. And anybody who wants to be a great leader and deviates from those examples of Jesus, deviates from maturity, deviates from being self-aware, deviates from humility, deviates from wisdom, deviates from sacrifice, just moves themselves further and further away from the wisest leader who has ever walked upon the planet. And I think if the teacher was able to see Jesus, you know, I said this over and over again throughout this series, is that really so much that the teacher was looking for is the teacher was looking for somebody like Jesus. And I think the teacher would see Jesus' leadership in action. His wisdom, his way of dealing with people, his patience, and say, oh, watch what that guy does. He knows how to live life to the fullest. Now we come back to the beginning of the text. And I saved this for last for a reason. And this is again to show the value of wisdom, but how often people avoid wisdom because they're taken in by something else. And this is from Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 13. And he gives this little parable. He says, I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. Is that a good line? There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But nobody remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Many think the teacher creates this parable to show the power of wisdom, and yet how quickly people will turn away from the power of wisdom to pursue other solutions. That the man saved the town through wisdom, but no one remembered the man. No one looked at the man and said, oh, I want to be wise like that man. You know what happened is they were taken in by the shouts of a ruler of fools. They were taken in by the loud shouts of somebody else. That we must realize that ones with true wisdom will not often be the ones with the loudest voices. Jesus was the most profound voice. He had the best voice. He had the best stories, but he was by no means the loudest voice with where he was. And I feel like I would like to hear more about the wise man of this city and what he did and how he did it. But the writer of Ecclesiastes doesn't really go into that. He just said it was his wisdom that allowed the city to survive when it was under siege. His great leadership that allowed the city to survive when it was under siege. There is a story similar to this in the scriptures. In 701 BC, the nation of Assyria, they were the most powerful superpower in the world at that point. And for nearly 30 years, the nation of Assyria was just kind of wreaking havoc in the ancient world. They were big, strong, organized, efficient. They were cruel in how they did things. And the Assyrian king, Sennacherib, and his huge army was moving up and down the coast of Judah towards Jerusalem. And the Assyrians, they kind of weren't like the Babylonians. They weren't like the Persians. They surpassed everybody in their savagery and their cruelty. As they conquered new places, they made sure that they took the leaders out, killed the leaders, and hung their leaders in the squares to kind of show, oh, there's new people in town, new people now in charge. They were masters at psychological warfare and creating fear, and they were making their way to Jerusalem. And the leader of Jerusalem at that time was King Hezekiah. Hezekiah became king at age 26. His father, King Ahaz, was one of the worst and most evil kings in history in that part of in Israel. But Hezekiah was very different than his father. And so Hezekiah came to develop this kind of deep love for the scriptures and a deep life with God. And so with the impending invasion coming, and this is all talked about in the book of 2 Chronicles, verses 32, is that the first thing Hezekiah did as a leader is he consulted with his team. The scriptures say they got together with his best advisors to figure out what to do. It's a sign of a great leader. Get the unvarnished perspective of other people. And after this strategy session, Hezekiah and his team, they made this bold decision to cut off the city's water supply, which may have seemed like an odd decision to do. You can just imagine people in the city why are you cutting off our water supply at such a crucial time? But see, the Assyrians, they were coming with battering rams to demolish the walls around the city. And Judah troops kept lighting the battering rams on fire. And the Assyrians needed water to drink and to extinguish the fires and the flames, but the water supplies had all been blocked. So it was a way to get rid of their big weapons by blocking the water so they could light them on fire so they couldn't destroy the walls. Pretty brilliant, wise move in battle. In preparation, Hezekiah led efforts to repair broken sections of the walls, to build towers for defensive purposes, to reinforce the terrace on the outside wall. He gathered together many weapons and many shields. And as they were prepared now for this battle, he gathers together his leaders. And he gives them this speech. He says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him. For there is a greater power with us than him. With him is only the army of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." And the people gained great confidence from what Hezekiah, the king of Judah, had said. That Hezekiah was known as a great king who protected the city. He was wise. He was an exceptional leader. He was not perfect. He struggled with the sin of pride as he got on later in his kingship, but was faithful to God during that long reign. And I waited on that last section. I included this last story, not because it's a one-to-one comparison with what is happening today, but it does bring to the forefront the pain of every war and the pain of every invasion and the pain of every weapon of war that is used, and the pain of every tank and gun and plane and bomb that is used in our world. They all show us the evil of this world. You know, N.T. Wright, he shares two insights about evil, and they've resonated with me for a long time. He says the first thing that he says about evil is this, is that we tend to ignore evil until it hits us in the face, and that's true. That you look at the record in history, and we've always, as human beings, wanted to eliminate categories of good and bad, evil and right, and kind of make all that when things are seemingly good, we find those kind of philosophies very appealing. We may even adopt a way of seeing the world that kind of eliminates evil or eliminates good and gets rid of all those categories for a time, but then our world is shattered because evil hits us in a way that surprises us. And that's his second thought. He says that we are then surprised by evil when it hits us in the face. As human beings have tried so long to eliminate the categories of foolishness and wisdom, good and bad, right and wrong, because in a relative world, then we can kind of make our own sense of right and wrong, our own sense of morals, our own way of doing things, that we can live the way that we want if we just eliminate all those categories. But that's not reality. Is we are creating a false world when we try and live that way. That when Jesus went to the cross, he had a reason for doing so. Something needed to be defeated. Something needed to be renewed. Something needed to be dealt with. That Jesus didn't go to the cross because there was opinions on what was good and evil. Jesus went to the cross because there was true evil in the world that was doing great destruction. That Jesus went to the cross because evil is a very real thing. We've felt it. We've seen it. We know it. We've seen the damage that evil does. We see how evil undoes creation. We've seen evil do its worst. And the only thing to bring life again was forgiveness and resurrection. And so you look again at the words of Ephesians 2. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. That it is okay and it is good that we call things that are wrong, wrong. And things that are evil, evil. And things that are loving, loving. And things that are good, good. We need those kinds of ways of looking at the world. We can't eliminate those. And he goes on to say, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. That even when we were dead in transgressions, It is by grace you have been saved, and God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Jesus Christ, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness and in Christ Jesus. That the teacher makes the case today. I think this case is affirmed in the life and in the message of Jesus Christ, that in a foolish world, wisdom, great leadership are traits to be pursued and are traits to be valued. Let us pray. I turn you again to the words of James, where James says, if you need wisdom, ask God for wisdom, who gives generously. And today I want to pray for the wisdom to think deeply about who are wise people and who are great leaders. God, I want to pray that for our country. I want to pray that for the world. God, give us the wisdom to see and to acknowledge what a great leader looks like, the qualities of a leader, the character of a leader, what a leader exemplifies. God, give us the wisdom to see what a person of great wisdom looks like, their patience, their discernment, their listening. Help us to live that way then for others. Help us to elevate those who show those qualities of great leadership and wisdom in the world around us, so that they may do great works in this place. Lord, we're grateful for your death on the cross, that you defeated death and defeated evil, and one day we will know the fullness of that victory when you come into the fullness of your kingdom. Help us to live now as heaven is on earth, in the way that we speak, in the way that we live, that we may share your love with those who are far from you. We ask all of this in your name. Amen. Well, next week, I invite you back again. Pastor David is going to tackle the issue of risk and risking wisely that the teacher in Ecclesiastes looks at. So, things about entrepreneurship, investment, all that stuff kind of gets into next week. So I'd invite you back again as we tackle this next week in the series of Ecclesiastes. This week, go with God's blessing. For you as a follower of Jesus, people are going to watch what you do this week. And so in word, in deed, in speech, share the love of Jesus Christ. Amen.